It seemed like an ordinary day for Sarah, the quiet grocery delivery woman weaving through the busy city streets. The hum of passing cars, the chatter of pedestrians, and the distant blare of horns created a familiar urban rhythm. With a sturdy delivery bag strapped to her back and a determined look on her face, Sarah blended into the everyday hustle. She was just another delivery worker at least, that's what everyone thought. Her day started early, as always. The sun was still climbing the horizon, casting a soft orange glow over the city skyline. Sarah adjusted her baseball cap and secured her gloves, ready for the long list of deliveries ahead. Her trusty electric bike hummed gently as she navigated through narrow streets and busy intersections. She greeted familiar shop owners with polite nods and exchanged friendly waves with other delivery workers she often crossed paths with. Despite her quiet nature, Sarah carried an air of calm confidence. Her eyes, sharp and observant, missed nothing. She knew these streets better than most. Every shortcut, every hidden alley, she had mapped them all in her mind. But there was more to her knowledge than just delivery routes. Sarah's awareness came from a past she rarely spoke about, a life far removed from the world of grocery deliveries. As she cruised down a familiar street, balancing her load of neatly packed grocery bags, she noticed a group of bikers loitering near the corner store. Loud, brash, and clad in leather jackets covered with intimidating patches, they seemed out of place in the otherwise quiet neighborhood. Sarah's eyes lingered on them just long enough to note their faces, their bikes, and the way they carried themselves, reckless and overconfident. Old habits die hard. Shrugging off the uneasy feeling, she continued her route, delivering bags to homes with precision and speed. Each stop was routine, a knock on the door, a quick greeting, and a swift return to her bike. She was efficient, focused, and determined to finish her deliveries before the afternoon rush hit. But as she turned onto a less traveled street lined with aging apartment buildings, the low, aggressive rumble of motorcycle engines echoed behind her. At first, she dismissed it as a coincidence. Bikers roamed the city often, and this was a known shortcut. But the persistent growl of engines growing closer made her glance over her shoulder. There they were, the same group of bikers she'd noticed earlier, now trailing behind her like a pack of wolves. Their engines revved, the deafening roar piercing the otherwise quiet street. Sarah's grip on her handlebars tightened, her mind working quickly. Years of experience kicked in, forcing her to stay calm and composed. The bikers drew nearer, their rough laughter and crude remarks carried on the wind. "Hey, delivery girl!" one of them shouted mockingly. "Need some help with that heavy bag?" The others erupted into laughter, circling closer like predators sizing up their prey. Sarah said nothing. She kept her eyes on the road ahead, her mind analyzing every possible outcome. She couldn't afford to react emotionally, not yet. Staying silent, she adjusted her balance on the bike, preparing for whatever might come next. The bikers continued their taunts, enjoying the power they believed they held over a seemingly defenseless delivery woman. "What's in the bag? Got anything worth sharing?" Another sneered, riding close enough for his bike's exhaust to brush against her side. Still, Sarah didn't respond. Inside, her pulse quickened, but her expression remained steady. She knew how to handle situations like this, she'd done it countless times before. They saw only a delivery woman, someone easy to intimidate. What they didn't see was the trained professional beneath the uniform, someone who had faced far worse threats in a previous life. Her past wasn't something she talked about. After all, people don't expect a former police officer, one of the city's most skilled detectives, to be delivering groceries. But life had taken unexpected turns, and Sarah had chosen a quieter path. Or so she thought. The bikers grew bolder, closing in on either side of her bike. "What's wrong? Cat got your tongue?" one of them jeered, his voice dripping with mockery. Another reached out as if to grab her delivery bag but pulled back at the last second, laughing at his own audacity. Sarah's eyes flicked to the nearest alleyway, a possible escape route if things went south. She mentally mapped out the quickest route to the nearest busy street where people might notice what was happening. But running wasn't her style, not unless it was the best option. Years of police training surged to the surface, sharpening her focus. Her breathing steadied, her senses heightened. Every sound, every movement registered clearly in her mind. The bikers might have seen her as an easy target, but they were playing a dangerous game without even knowing it. Still, Sarah waited, biding her time. Reacting too soon could escalate the situation. She needed them to believe they had control for now. They had no idea what they were up against, and that small advantage was hers to keep. The street stretched ahead, quiet and deserted. The perfect place for trouble, or a perfect place for justice to be served. The narrow street stretched out like a forgotten path, lined with crumbling brick buildings and old, rusting street signs. The only sounds were the echoing rumble of the bikers' engines and the steady hum of Sarah's electric bike. The air felt charged, thick with tension, as if the city itself sensed what was about to unfold. Sarah kept her expression neutral, masking the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. She had been in far more dangerous situations before, ones where a single wrong move could cost lives. Back then, she wore a badge, carried a gun, and had backup just a radio call away. Now, it was just her, a bag of groceries, and 5 bikers who clearly believed they held all the power. The bikers' leader, a towering man with a scruffy beard and cold, calculating eyes, revved his engine aggressively, pulling up just a few feet behind her. His leather jacket bore a crude patch that read Iron Fang's MC. He was the type who thrived on intimidation, someone who'd probably spent his life taking what he wanted without consequence. He signaled to the others with a subtle nod, and they fanned out, forming a loose semicircle around Sarah. Each of their bikes growled like wild beasts waiting to pounce. Sarah's fingers twitched ever so slightly against the bike's handlebars, a movement born of instinct, ready to react at a moment's notice. One of the younger bikers, a wiry man with a jagged scar running down his cheek, rode close enough that his handlebars nearly scraped hers. He leered at her with a twisted grin. "You lost, delivery girl," he sneered, his voice dripping with menace. Sarah didn't answer. She'd learned long ago that words meant little to men like these. They thrived on fear, on seeing their targets squirm. Her silence only seemed to amuse them more. The leader chuckled, a low, menacing sound that sent a chill through the quiet street. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" His voice was rough and commanding, the voice of someone used to being obeyed or else. Sarah glanced briefly at her delivery bag, filled with everyday items: milk, bread, fresh vegetables, things meant for a family waiting on the other side of the city. In that moment, she thought about how simple her life could have been if she'd stayed retired. She had walked away from her old life for a reason. But trouble, it seemed, had a way of finding her no matter how far she ran. The leader signaled again, and 2 bikers peeled off, circling ahead to block the narrow street's exit. Sarah's heart pounded steadily in her chest, but her breathing remained controlled. Panic was the enemy, calm was her weapon. "You know," the scar-faced biker hissed, "you should really be more polite when someone offers assistance." He reached toward her delivery bag, fingers curling as if ready to snatch it away. Before he could touch the bag, Sarah shifted her weight ever so slightly, tilting her bike just enough to make it seem like she was struggling to balance. The biker laughed, thinking she was scared and unstable. But that small movement wasn't an accident, it was calculated, precise, meant to throw them off. The leader dismounted his bike with a heavy thud, his boots crunching against the cracked pavement. He walked toward her slowly, savoring the moment. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he growled. "Just hand over the bag, and maybe we'll let you ride away in one piece." Sarah met his gaze for the first time. Her eyes, steady and unyielding, locked onto his with a sharpness that made him hesitate just for a split second. There was something in her expression, something far colder and more dangerous than he expected. It wasn't fear. It was readiness. But the moment passed, and the leader brushed off the uneasy feeling prickling at the back of his neck. After all, she was just a delivery woman, wasn't she? He stepped closer, towering over her. His hand rested casually on a knife strapped to his belt, a silent reminder of how easily he thought he could control the situation. His confidence was absolute but misplaced. Sarah's mind calculated distances, angles, and possible escape routes in the blink of an eye. She noted the positions of each biker, the layout of the street, the weight of her delivery bag strapped securely to her back. Her every sense was heightened, sharp as a blade. The leader reached out, grabbing the edge of her bike's handlebar, forcing her to stop. "Last chance," he hissed. "Give us the bag." Sarah tilted her head ever so slightly, her expression unreadable. Then, with a voice as steady as steel, she spoke for the first time. "Walk away," she said quietly but firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. For a moment, the street fell silent, the distant sounds of the city fading into nothingness. The bikers stared at her, stunned by her sudden defiance. Then, as if snapping out of a spell, the leader's face twisted into a snarl. "Wrong answer." He lunged forward, his hand reaching for the bag, but Sarah was already moving. With lightning-fast reflexes, she twisted her bike's handlebars, forcing the leader off balance. His grip slipped, and he stumbled back, cursing loudly. Before the others could react, Sarah was off her bike, standing firm, feet planted in a defensive stance that spoke volumes. The bikers exchanged uncertain glances. Something about the way she moved was wrong. Delivery workers didn't react like that. They didn't stand their ground against men like them. The leader straightened, his face flushed with anger. "You're gonna regret that," he snarled. But deep down, a sliver of doubt crept into his mind, a faint, nagging thought he couldn't quite shake. Who was this woman? And why did she seem so prepared? The bikers weren't just looking for trouble, they were out to humiliate. They moved like a pack of predators, circling Sarah's electric bike as if daring her to make a wrong move. Their loud engines echoed through the narrow street, sending vibrations through the ground. People on the sidewalks glanced over but quickly looked away, not wanting to get involved. Sarah kept her eyes on the road ahead, gripping her handlebars tighter. She didn't speed up or slow down. Panicking would only make things worse. Her mind was sharp, already calculating possible exits, obstacles, and options. "Hey, delivery girl. Watch where you're going," one of the bikers sneered, swerving dangerously close to her. His bike roared as he sped past, making it seem like he might clip her front wheel. Sarah didn't flinch. She'd seen far worse. Another biker, a lanky man with wild eyes and a scar down his cheek, pulled up beside her, leering with a twisted grin. "What's in the bag, sweetheart?" "Dinner for us." He reached out, pretending to grab at her delivery bag strapped securely to her back. Sarah shifted slightly, keeping her bike steady while putting just enough distance between them. Her heart beat steadily, but her expression remained calm, unreadable. She had spent years controlling her emotions in situations far more dangerous than this. These men didn't scare her, they only made her more alert. The leader of the group, a tall, muscular man with a thick beard and piercing eyes, watched her closely from the back of the group. His leather jacket bore the patch Iron Fangs MC, and a jagged knife rested in a sheath on his belt. He didn't speak yet, letting his crew have their fun first. He was calculating, measuring Sarah's reaction or lack of it. Another biker, younger but just as reckless, sped ahead and cut sharply in front of her, forcing her to brake hard to avoid a collision. Her bike skidded slightly, but she regained control instantly, her grip firm and steady. Oops, the biker shouted mockingly. Didn't see you there, delivery girl. His laugh was cold, echoing off the surrounding buildings. Sarah's sharp eyes tracked every movement without turning her head. She could sense the power dynamic they were trying to establish: intimidation through dominance, control through chaos. They expected fear, panic, maybe even tears. But Sarah gave them none of that. The bikers seemed puzzled by her lack of response. Their typical targets usually begged, yelled, or tried to flee. But Sarah's silence was unsettling, like the calm before a violent storm. The scar-faced biker circled back and drew dangerously close again, his expression twisted with amusement. "What's wrong, too scared to talk?" he taunted. "Or maybe you're just dumb." Sarah's jaw clenched ever so slightly, but she still didn't respond. Inside, she was fully aware of every sound, every movement, every possible escape route. Her mind worked with precision, assessing the situation like she had done so many times in her previous life. The leader finally spoke, his voice deep and commanding. "What's the rush, lady? We're just being friendly." His tone dripped with false sincerity, a predator's smile curling at the edges of his mouth. He rode up beside her, his presence more imposing than the others. His piercing eyes met hers, searching for any sign of fear or weakness. But all he found was cold, steady determination, a look he couldn't quite understand. "Maybe she's got something special in that bag," he added, smirking. "Something worth sharing with us." The group erupted in mocking laughter, closing in even tighter. Sarah's eyes flicked to the street ahead. They were forcing her into a trap, cutting off exits and steering her toward a deserted alley where no one would see or hear what happened next. She couldn't let them box her in. Not here. Without changing her expression, she adjusted her grip on the handlebars. Every muscle in her body was tense but controlled, ready to react at a moment's notice. She let them believe she was cornered, powerless, helpless. But they were wrong. The scar-faced biker reached out again, this time aiming to grab her arm. His fingers brushed her sleeve, but in one fluid motion, Sarah twisted her bike sharply to the side, causing his hand to miss completely. The sudden move made him lose balance for a split second, forcing him to steady his bike with a curse. The other bikers cursed and jeered, mistaking her move for panic rather than calculated defense. "She's got some fight in her," one of them shouted, revving his engine. The leader's smile faded slightly. Something about the way she moved, so precise, so controlled, set off a faint alarm in the back of his mind. She wasn't reacting the way most people did. She wasn't pleading or panicking. He shoved the thought aside. "Enough games," he growled, signaling to his crew. "Let's see what she's really made of." The bikers spread out, forming a tighter circle around her, their engines roaring in unison like a pack of hungry wolves closing in for the kill. Sarah's fingers tightened on her handlebars one last time. Her heart pounded steadily, her breathing slow and even. They thought they were in control. They thought she was just a helpless delivery woman. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The bikers' engines roared louder as they tightened their circle, making the air vibrate with mechanical growls. Dust rose from the cracked pavement, swirling around Sarah like a warning, but she remained still, her expression unreadable. The leader, known as Grizzly among his crew, dismounted his roaring motorcycle with an air of absolute dominance. His heavy boots hit the ground with a solid thud, sending a message that he was used to being feared. He adjusted his leather gloves slowly, savoring the intimidation game like a predator savoring the chase. His crew, fueled by his confidence, hooted and jeered from their bikes, their twisted grins gleaming under the pale streetlights. Sarah watched every move, reading the situation with the same sharp instincts that had kept her alive through far worse encounters. "You sure are quiet," Grizzly sneered, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Most people would be begging by now, or running." The others laughed, their voices harsh and mocking. One of them, a stocky brute called Tank, revved his bike aggressively, causing its back tire to spit gravel in Sarah's direction. Sarah didn't flinch. She stood firmly, her eyes locked on Grizzly like she was studying him, assessing every detail. His scars, the way he favored his left side slightly, the knife strapped to his belt, everything registered in her mind like pieces of a deadly puzzle. Maybe she's frozen in fear, sneered the scar-faced biker, who hadn't stopped circling like a restless hyena. Bet she didn't think her little delivery route would end like this. Sarah let her gaze flick toward him briefly, not out of fear, but calculation. He was reckless, eager to prove himself, likely the one who would strike first. Grizzly took a slow, deliberate step toward her, his boots grinding against the rough pavement. He tilted his head, narrowing his eyes as if trying to pierce through her calm facade. Something about her stillness made him uneasy, just enough for a flicker of doubt to surface in his mind. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he admitted, his tone almost respectful. "But guts won't save you." He reached out suddenly, grabbing the strap of her delivery bag. His fingers curled around the worn fabric, ready to rip it away. But before he could pull, Sarah moved. With a fluid, practiced motion, she twisted her body, yanking the bag free and spinning just out of reach. Grizzly's hand closed on empty air, his face twisting into a snarl of surprise. The biker's laughter died instantly, replaced by stunned silence. Sarah's stance had shifted, her feet planted firmly, her hands steady. She didn't look like a cornered victim anymore. She looked ready. Grizzly's eyes narrowed. "You think you're tough, huh?" he hissed, stepping forward again. "You don't know who you're messing with." Sarah held his gaze steadily, her voice cold and measured. "Neither do you." For a moment, the street was silent except for the distant hum of traffic far away. The bikers exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't how their usual shakedowns went. Most people crumbled at the first sign of trouble, begging, pleading, or running. But this woman, she wasn't breaking. Grizzly bared his teeth in a snarl, refusing to be outmatched by someone he still believed was just a stubborn delivery worker. "Grab her," he barked, his voice sharp and commanding. The scar-faced biker lunged first, his wiry frame moving with the speed of someone used to street fights. He aimed for her delivery bag again, expecting her to resist the same way she had before. But Sarah was already moving. In one swift motion, she sidestepped his grasp, twisting his extended arm with practiced precision. Before he could react, she delivered a sharp elbow to his ribs, knocking the air from his lungs with a sickening crack. He stumbled back, gasping, eyes wide with shock. The others hesitated for a split second, just long enough for Sarah to adjust her stance, her expression as cold and focused as ever. "You little!" Tank roared, charging at her like a human battering ram. Sarah waited until the last second, then dropped low, sweeping her leg out in a precise arc that caught Tank's ankle. His massive frame toppled with a bone-jarring thud, sending dust and gravel flying. Grizzly's face twisted with fury. "Get her," he barked, yanking the knife from his belt. Two more bikers rushed forward, their faces twisted in rage. Sarah's mind worked at lightning speed, calculating every movement, every angle. They were fast, but she was faster. The first lunged with a wild swing, aiming for her head. She ducked smoothly, delivering a sharp palm strike to his jaw, sending him reeling. The second tried to grab her from behind, but she twisted free with a fluid spin, slamming her knee into his stomach. He crumpled with a strangled groan. Breathing hard, Sarah stepped back, her eyes locked on Grizzly, the last man standing. His chest heaved with fury, his knife gleaming under the flickering streetlights. "Who are you?" he growled, realization dawning far too late. Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her stance, her precision, her controlled ferocity, they told him everything he needed to know. She wasn't just some delivery worker. She was something far more dangerous. Grizzly lunged with a roar, his knife flashing through the air in a deadly arc. But Sarah was ready. She sidestepped smoothly, her hand snapping out to lock around his wrist with crushing force. With a sharp twist, she disarmed him, sending the knife clattering to the ground. Before he could react, she drove her elbow into his jaw with brutal precision, dropping him like a stone. The street fell silent, the only sound the distant hum of the city. Breathing steadily, Sarah straightened, her expression as calm and controlled as ever. She adjusted her delivery bag, making sure its contents were still secure. The bikers lay scattered across the street, groaning in pain and disbelief. They had thought they were the predators, but they had never stood a chance. Sarah turned and climbed back onto her electric bike, her hands steady, her mind already shifting back to her next delivery. Behind her, the bikers struggled to comprehend what had just happened. Grizzly, still gasping for breath, managed to lift his head, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. "Who the hell are you?" he rasped. Sarah glanced back just once, her eyes cold and resolute. "Someone you should have left alone." And with that, she rode away, leaving them broken, battered and far wiser than they had been before. As the harassment escalated, the bikers grew bolder. Their taunts turned nastier, their maneuvers more reckless. They swerved dangerously close to Sarah's electric delivery bike, forcing her toward the edge of the narrow street. Gravel crunched beneath her wheels as she skillfully corrected her path, keeping her balance steady. "Come on, delivery girl, show us what you got," one of the bikers jeered, his voice sharp and mocking. His bike veered dangerously close, his leather jacket emblazoned with a snarling wolf insignia and the words Iron Fangs MC stitched in blood-red letters. Sarah's sharp eyes tracked every movement without turning her head. She noted the patched vests, the rusted chains dangling from handlebars, and the makeshift clubs strapped to their bikes. These weren't just rowdy thrill-seekers. They were hardened men who thrived on control through fear. But control was something Sarah never surrendered, not in her past life, and certainly not now. "Hey, sweetheart. Need a hand carrying those groceries?" another biker shouted, his cruel laughter echoing through the street. He spat on the ground and twisted his throttle, causing his bike to lurch menacingly forward. Sarah remained expressionless, her mind clicking through potential escape routes like gears in a well-oiled machine. She mentally mapped the nearby streets, alleys, and intersections, considering every possibility. She had been trained to assess threats in an instant, to calculate outcomes, and most importantly to stay in control. Her fingers brushed the smooth fabric of her delivery bag. Inside, groceries shifted with every bump, but something far more valuable rested beneath them, something she couldn't afford to lose. For a fleeting moment, the present dissolved into memory. Years ago, she had faced men like these, dangerous, arrogant, and hungry for power. Back then, she wore a badge pinned proudly to her chest, backed by the authority of the law. But the uniform hadn't shielded her from violence, it had made her a target. She remembered long nights patrolling the city's toughest streets, where gangs ruled through intimidation. She had learned quickly that survival wasn't about strength, it was about control, about using an opponent's assumptions against them. Most people underestimated her at first. They saw only a slender woman with quiet determination in her eyes. They never saw the storm until it was too late. Her grip on the handlebars tightened subtly, grounding her back in the present. She wasn't wearing the badge anymore, but that didn't mean she had forgotten what it stood for or how to fight back when cornered. The bikers continued their twisted game, weaving in and out like wolves circling prey. One particularly aggressive rider, his face marked with a jagged scar, revved his engine and sped toward her side, nearly brushing her shoulder. Sarah swerved just in time, avoiding a collision by mere inches. He laughed harshly. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Still, Sarah stayed silent. Talking was pointless, it would only feed their power trip. Instead, she studied their formation. They were reckless but coordinated, following the orders of the tall, bearded leader she'd mentally labeled Grizzly. His calculating gaze tracked her every move with a hunter's focus. He wasn't just playing a game, he was assessing her, trying to measure how much fight she had left. The bikers closed in tighter, boxing her toward a narrow side street. It was darker, quieter, perfect for whatever they had planned. But Sarah saw through the tactic instantly. She adjusted her route subtly, keeping to the better lit main road despite their attempts to steer her away. Her steady composure was starting to unnerve them. Most people would have panicked, screamed, or tried to flee, but Sarah did none of those things.